The first thing I remember after waking up from surgery was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you'd expect in a hospital room, but the hollow, violated silence of a life that had been gutted while I lay unconscious on an operating table. My name is Marcus Whitmore, and at 60 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal the business world could offer. I was wrong. The second thing I noticed was Ethan Cole sitting in the chair beside my bed. His face a mask of concern that I would later recognize as the performance of a lifetime. Ethan, my protege, the young man I'd mentored for 15 years, the one I'd trusted with my life's work. He held a manila folder in his hands, and when he opened it, my world collapsed. "Marcus," he said, his voice soft with manufactured sympathy, "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. But while you were in surgery, I had to make some difficult decisions. The doctors said you might not make it, and the business, well, it couldn't wait." I stared at the documents he placed before me. Sale agreements, transfer papers, my signature on dotted lines. Signatures I'd never made, authorizing the sale of Whitmore Industries, the company I'd built from nothing over 30 years. My hands shook as I lifted the papers, not from the surgery, but from rage so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. "You sold my company," I whispered, the words barely audible through the oxygen mask. "I saved it," Ethan corrected, leaning forward with that earnest expression he'd perfected over the years. "The medical bills, the uncertainty about your condition. The investors were getting nervous. I had to act quickly to preserve what you built. The medical power of attorney. I'd signed it myself, back when Ethan was just an ambitious young MBA who reminded me of myself at that age. It was supposed to be for emergencies, for medical decisions if I couldn't make them myself. I never imagined it would be used to steal everything I'd worked for. Over the next few days, as my strength returned, the full scope of the betrayal became clear. My bank accounts had been drained to cover the medical expenses and business debts, Ethan explained. My office had been cleared out. My access to company systems had been revoked. In the span of a single surgical procedure, I'd gone from CEO of a $50 million company to a patient in a hospital bed with nothing but the clothes on my back. But Ethan had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. The old Marcus might have raged, might have threatened lawyers and lawsuits, might have made a scene that would have been easy to dismiss as the ramblings of a sick old man. But lying in that hospital bed, watching the man I'd trusted like a son explain how he'd saved my company by stealing it, something cold and calculating settled in my chest. This wasn't going to be about emotion. This was going to be about strategy. I smiled at Ethan and thanked him for his quick thinking. The first person I called was Arthur Langley, my lawyer and friend for over 20 years. Arthur was old school, the kind of lawyer who still wore suspenders and kept his most important files in a safe rather than on a computer. When I told him what had happened, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Marcus," he finally said, his voice heavy with something between grief and fury. "I need to see those documents. All of them." Arthur came to the hospital that evening, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled with urgency. He spread the papers across my bedside table like a forensic expert examining evidence at a crime scene. For 2 hours, he read every line, every clause, every signature, his face growing darker with each page. "Son of a bitch," he finally muttered, a profanity I'd never heard him use in all our years of friendship. "Marcus, this is fraud. Plain and simple. These signatures aren't yours. I know that. You know that. But proving it in court could take years, and by then, there might not be a company left to fight for." Arthur looked at me over his reading glasses, and I saw a spark of something dangerous in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Ethan Cole is about to learn that stealing from me was the biggest mistake of his career." The next morning, I discharged myself from the hospital against medical advice. My granddaughter Sophie, a sharp 28-year-old with her grandmother's steel spine and my analytical mind, drove me to a small apartment I'd rented under a shell company I'd established years ago for investments. It was spartanly furnished but had everything I needed: a secure internet connection, multiple phone lines, and most importantly, privacy. "Grandpa," Sophie said as she helped me set up my temporary office, "what exactly are you planning?" I pulled out a notebook and began writing names, connections, financial relationships, a web of business dealings that Ethan thought he understood but had never truly grasped. I'm going to teach him the difference between stealing a company and running one. The first week was reconnaissance. I had Sophie, who worked in financial analysis for a consulting firm, start digging into Whitmore Industries' current financial status. What she found was worse than I'd imagined, but also exactly what I'd hoped for. "Grandpa, they're hemorrhaging money," she reported during our daily briefing. "Without your relationships, your knowledge of the industry, your strategic vision, they're flying blind. They've already lost 3 major contracts, and their quarterly projections are abysmal." But that wasn't the worst of it. As Sophie dug deeper, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Ethan hadn't just stolen my company on a whim. This had been planned for years. "Look at this," Sophie said, spreading financial records across my small dining table. "There are payments to shell companies going back 18 months. Small amounts at first but increasing over time. And look at the signatures on the authorization forms. My own signature, forged with increasing skill over time. Ethan had been practicing, perfecting the art of stealing from me while I'd been mentoring him, trusting him, treating him like the son I'd never had. "He's been embezzling for years," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Using his access to my signature stamps, my accounts, my trust. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was systematic, calculated fraud." Sophie's face was pale with anger. "We need to call the police. The FBI. This is criminal." "We will," I assured her. "But first, we're going to give Ethan Cole a master class in how business really works." The next phase required patience and precision. Through Arthur's connections and my own network of former colleagues, I began to quietly gather intelligence on Whitmore Industries' current financial situation. What I learned was both worse and better than I'd expected. Worse because Ethan had truly gutted the company's foundation. He'd fired veteran employees, cancelled long-term contracts in favor of short-term profits, and alienated suppliers who'd worked with me for decades. The company was bleeding talent and money at an alarming rate. Better because his desperation was making him reckless. In his panic to show immediate profits to justify the acquisition, Ethan was taking on debt. Lots of debt. He'd leveraged the company's assets to secure loans, extended credit lines, and even taken advances on future contracts that I knew he'd never be able to fulfill. And debt, as I'd learned over 30 years in business, was power. Began making calls. Not to Ethan, not to anyone at Whitmore Industries, but to the financial institutions that held the company's debt. I'd done business with many of them over the years, and they remembered Marcus Whitmore even if they didn't know about my current situation. "I'm looking to diversify my investment portfolio," I told the debt manager at First Capital Bank. "I'm particularly interested in commercial debt portfolios. Do you have anything available?" It's amazing how eager banks are to sell debt when they're worried about collection. And they were worried about Whitmore Industries. The company's financial instability was becoming apparent to everyone except Ethan, who was too busy playing CEO to notice the foundation crumbling beneath him. Over the next month, I quietly purchased debt from 7 different financial institutions. Not directly, of course. That would have tipped off Ethan. Instead, I worked through a network of shell companies and investment funds, buying up Whitmore Industries' obligations piece by piece. The beauty of debt collection is that it's perfectly legal. When you own someone's debt, you own a piece of their future. And when you own enough of their debt, you own them. By the end of 6 weeks, I controlled nearly 60% of Whitmore Industries' total debt load. Ethan Cole, the man who'd stolen my company, now owed me more money than the company was worth. It was time for the next phase. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. I'd learned about it through Sophie, who'd begun cultivating relationships with some of the remaining employees at Whitmore Industries. They were good people, many of whom had worked for me for years, and they were as disgusted by Ethan's leadership as I was. "They're planning to present the quarterly results," Sophie told me. From what I've heard, they're catastrophic. The board is already asking questions about the acquisition, about whether it was really necessary. Perfect, I said, adjusting the pocket watch that had been my father's, that had been his father's before him. It was a symbol of patience, of understanding that some things were worth waiting for. Make sure they know I'll be attending. The look on Ethan's face when I walked into that boardroom was worth every moment of planning, every sleepless night, every day of careful, patient strategy. He went white, then red, then white again. His carefully rehearsed presentation forgotten as he stared at the man he'd tried to destroy. "Marcus," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here as a concerned creditor," I said, taking a seat at the table where I'd once led strategy sessions and made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. "You see, Ethan, I've been doing some thinking since I recovered from my surgery. And one of the things I thought about was how much this company owes to various financial institutions." I placed a folder on the table, thick with debt collection notices, loan agreements, and ownership transfers. I thought it might be helpful for the board to understand the full scope of Whitmore Industries' financial obligations. Rachel Bennett, the CFO who'd helped Ethan orchestrate the takeover, leaned forward with a nervous smile. "Marcus, I don't think you understand the current financial structure of the company. You're no longer involved in day-to-day operations." "You're absolutely right, Rachel," I said, opening the folder. "I'm not involved in day-to-day operations, but I am involved in debt collection. You see, over the past several weeks, I've been purchasing Whitmore Industries debt from various financial institutions. Not as Marcus Whitmore, the former CEO, but as a private investor interested in distressed assets." The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the ticking of my pocket watch. "I now own 63% of this company's total debt," I continued, my voice calm and professional, "which means I have certain rights regarding the collection of that debt. Rights that include demanding immediate payment, seizing assets, and, if necessary, forcing the company into bankruptcy proceedings." Ethan's face had gone from white to gray. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can," Arthur said, standing up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the corner. "And it's completely legal. Your former mentor here has been very thorough in ensuring that every transaction, every purchase, every debt acquisition has been properly documented and executed according to state and federal regulations." I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city where I'd built my empire. "Here's what's going to happen, Ethan. You're going to resign as CEO immediately. Rachel is going to provide a full accounting of all financial transactions made since the company's acquisition, including the forged signatures and embezzled funds. And you're both going to cooperate fully with the SEC investigation that Arthur filed this morning." "Investigation?" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh yes," I said, turning back to face them. "It turns out that using a medical power of attorney to sell someone's company without their knowledge or consent is illegal. As is forging signatures on financial documents. As is embezzling company funds through shell companies. The SEC is very interested in your creative accounting methods." Ethan tried one last gambit. "The board won't support this. They approved the acquisition." I looked around the table at the board members, many of whom had worked with me for years. Actually, they didn't approve the acquisition. They were told it was a medical emergency requiring immediate action. They were lied to, just like I was. Board Chairman Robert Hayes, a man I'd known for 15 years, cleared his throat. "Marcus, if what you're saying is true, if this acquisition was fraudulent, then the board needs to take immediate action to rectify the situation." "It is true," I said, pulling out a thick folder of evidence. "And it's all documented. The forged signatures, the embezzled funds, the manipulation of financial records. It's all here." What happened next was swift and decisive. The board voted unanimously to remove Ethan as CEO and install me as interim chairman while a full investigation was conducted. Rachel, faced with the prospect of federal charges, agreed to cooperate fully with authorities in exchange for immunity. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about getting my company back. This was about ensuring that what happened to me never happened to anyone else. Over the next 3 months, I restructured Whitmore Industries from the ground up. I brought back the employees Ethan had fired, restored the contracts he'd cancelled, and rebuilt the relationships he'd destroyed. But more importantly, I changed the fundamental structure of the company. I'm making it employee-owned, I announced at the first company-wide meeting after regaining control. Every person who works here will have a stake in what we build together. No one person will ever again have the power to steal what belongs to all of us. Sophie, who'd proved herself invaluable during the crisis, became Chief Operating Officer. Her first initiative was establishing a fund for entrepreneurs who'd been victims of financial elder abuse. If this can happen to someone as savvy and successful as my grandfather, she said, it can happen to anyone. The legal consequences for Ethan were severe. The SEC investigation revealed a pattern of fraud that went beyond even what I'd suspected. He was charged with multiple federal crimes, including wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. His assets were frozen. His marriage ended in divorce, and his reputation in the business community was permanently destroyed. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when Ethan called me personally. "Marcus," he said, his voice broken with desperation, "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But I'm asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for another chance." I sat in my restored office, my father's pocket watch ticking steadily on the desk, and considered his words. Outside my window, the city sprawled in all directions, full of ambition and possibility and the dreams of people who believed in building something better. "Ethan," I said finally, "I want you to understand something. What you did to me wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a systematic, calculated betrayal that took years to execute. You didn't just steal my company. You stole my trust, my faith in the people I care about, my belief that the business world could be a place of honor and integrity." "I know," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Your apology is noted," I said. "But forgiveness, that's something you'll have to earn from someone else. Because I have more important things to do than waste time on someone who chose to be a thief instead of a leader." I hung up the phone and never heard from him again. The transformation of Whitmore Industries took 2 years to complete, but when it was finished, it was stronger than it had ever been. The employee ownership model created a level of commitment and innovation that I'd never seen in my 30 years of business. People cared about the company's success because they shared in it directly. Sophie proved to be an exceptional leader, combining my strategic thinking with her generation's understanding of technology and social responsibility. Under her guidance, the company expanded into new markets while maintaining the ethical standards that had always been my priority. The fund for exploited entrepreneurs grew beyond anything I'd initially imagined. We helped dozens of older business owners who'd been victimized by unscrupulous partners, family members, or employees. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same: trust betrayed, lives destroyed, and the need for patient strategic response. But perhaps the most important change was in me. The betrayal had wounded me in ways I didn't fully understand at first. It had shaken my faith in people in the business world, in the idea that hard work and integrity would be rewarded. Lying in that hospital bed, discovering that everything I'd built had been stolen while I was unconscious, I'd felt more than anger. I'd felt despair. The process of fighting back, of using my knowledge and experience to systematically reclaim what was mine, had restored something I didn't even realize I'd lost. It wasn't just about the money or the company. It was about proving to myself that I still had value, that my years of experience and accumulated wisdom meant something, that an old man could still outmaneuver a young thief if he was patient and smart. The debt I'd purchased to regain control of my company became the foundation for a new business model. Instead of simply collecting what was owed, I began working with struggling companies to restructure their debt, to find sustainable solutions that preserved jobs and communities. It was more profitable in the long run, and it felt better too. On the 5th anniversary of my surgery, I sat in my office looking at the financial reports that showed Whitmore Industries had achieved record profits while maintaining the highest employee satisfaction ratings in our industry. Sophie knocked on my door, carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Celebrating something?" "Yes. Celebrating everything," she said, pouring the champagne. "The company, the fund, the fact that you turned what could have been the worst thing that ever happened to you into the best thing that ever happened to all of us." I raised my glass and looked out at the city where I'd spent my career, where I'd built something that would outlast me, where I'd learned that true power didn't come from position or title or even money. It came from patience, from understanding that some battles were worth fighting, and from the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well. "To second chances," I said. "To making them count," Sophie replied. We drank the champagne as the sun set over the city, and I thought about the man who'd tried to destroy me, who'd thought that stealing my company would be the end of Marcus Whitmore's story. He'd been wrong about a lot of things, but he'd been most wrong about that. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The pocket watch on my desk continued its steady ticking, marking time with the patience of generations, reminding me that some things are worth waiting for, that some victories are worth the careful, methodical work they require. I'd learned that debt could be a weapon, but it could also be a tool for building something better. I'd learned that betrayal could destroy you, but only if you let it. And I'd learned that the most powerful form of revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation. Ethan Cole had sold my business, thinking he was stealing my future. Instead, he'd given me the opportunity to build something even better than what I'd lost. He'd taught me that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. He'd shown me that wisdom gained through experience was more valuable than any company, any amount of money, any position of power. In trying to destroy me, he'd forced me to become better than I'd ever been. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.
And that's how Marcus Whitmore turned his greatest betrayal into his most powerful comeback. Sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most, but as this story shows, patience, strategy, and wisdom can overcome even the most calculated deceptions. What did you think of Marcus's approach? Was his revenge justified, or should he have taken a different path? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts on these complex moral situations. If you enjoyed this story of strategic revenge and business justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We've got more incredible true stories coming your way every day, from corporate intrigue to family betrayals to the most satisfying comebacks you've ever heard. And don't forget to like this video if it kept you on the edge of your seat. Your support means everything to me and helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better.